Apart from military conflicts, which involved essentially intrastate conflicts like ethnic conflicts, civil wars, the post-Cold War era has also witnessed another kind of non-military conflicts and non-military threats to security, which are not strictly speaking conflicts in the sense that, that there are actually wars or any kinds of, groups getting into conflicts with each other. What I'm talking about actually are threats which are more invisible, but they are apparent. For instance, economic and financial instability, energy supplies, global warming and climate change, and also human rights. I mean, the issue of human rights. Now, these are all intertwined with security interests of states and the world community. For instance, let us take the issue of economic and financial instability. Now, this is something that has dogged particularly the developing countries in the wake of the liberalization and privatization and globalization that has taken place during the post-Cold War era. Now, globalization is a phenomenon, of course, which which is very, very prevalent, and it essentially means that state borders have become increasingly more irrelevant, and political, economic, financial, cultural, and other kinds of transactions are increasingly taking place across the border without the kind of hindrances or roadblocks that used to prevail earlier. This is something that is linked to the challenges of nation states that are apparent that we witness during the post-Cold War period. Now, taking this issue of economic and financial instability, what I essentially mean is that during the post-Cold War era, particularly developing countries and developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they are increasingly facing the threats of any kind of exposure, any kind of external penetration into their economies, and as a result of which their economies are increasingly vulnerable. On the one hand, they need resources for their economic development. Because we are talking about countries which are very poor, which have been under colonial exploitation for very long periods of time, and so therefore their economic development actually is absolute priority. And economic development requires resources, resources which they lack. So therefore, they need resources which can only come from external sources. And these external sources can be divided into two. On the one hand, of course, you have organizations, institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. On the other hand, of course, you have private capital from rich industrialized countries, which are looking for better returns on their capital, and they try to invest in markets, wherever they feel that the returns will be the best possible. So obviously, this is where actually, private capital actually comes in. This is how private capital comes in to these developing countries. But the fact of the matter is that these foreign capitals are, you can never rely on them. They will only remain in your economy as long as your economy is giving them the best possible returns. Now, if your economy, for some reasons or other, in fact, begin to give them not the kind of returns that they expect, or they have been enjoying for a considerable period of time, they will simply withdraw their capital, and this can lead to a collapse of the financial markets and the economic system. Now, this is precisely what happened in East and Southeast Asia in 1997, when, as a result of flight of capital, in fact, these the financial markets in these countries actually collapsed, and the currencies in these countries, particularly I am talking about South Korea, Indonesia, Thailand. These were the countries which were most badly affected because their currencies actually collapsed, and that had and whenever you have this kind of economic meltdown, invariably it has its repercussions on the society, at large. Social unrest increases, unemployment increases. And so therefore, the condition of the people worsens, and consequently, this actually leads to outbreak of violence and, all kinds of unrest that you can think of. In fact, in Indonesia, President Suharto, who had ruled for a period of something like 40 years, in fact, had to resign in 1998 as a result of this kind of collapse. Now, similar situations have also been witnessed in Latin America, particularly in Argentina, where, of course, this kind of financial collapse actually had taken place in the late 90s and the early part of this century. Now, African countries, they are also adversely affected by this kind of financial instability and economic meltdown. This kind of instability, financial instability, has affected many countries, as I mentioned, in Asia, Africa, as well as Latin America. And therefore, it has fueled social unrest. And another major consequence of this kind of instability and social unrest is the emergence of the phenomenon called economic migrants or refugees. Now, of course, refugees, this is a phenomenon that has become a very major issue in the post-Cold War era, because, and there are, of course, many reasons why a person actually becomes a refugee. It could be due to internal conflict, which I have already discussed, that is ethnic conflicts. And as a result of that, a particular ethnic group is forced to flee their country and seek refuge in another country. It can also happen because of what I was discussing just a little while ago, namely economic failures. As a result of lack of jobs, as a result of poverty, as a result of deprivation of all kinds of basic human amenities, a person likes to seek a new life in a different country. And this is what actually we have been witnessing for particularly over the last 2 decades. The latest manifestation of this, of course, is the refugee crisis in Europe, where lakhs of refugees running even into millions are fleeing from war-torn countries like Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and seeking refuge in Europe. Now, African countries, I was referring to African countries earlier. In fact, it has happened in Africa also as a result of either ethnic conflicts or because of economic failures. These are generally known as failed states, and so therefore large numbers of their inhabitants actually seek refuge elsewhere. So this is a major phenomenon and a major problem, and the world is trying to find a solution to this particular problem. Another kind of threat to security which has emerged particularly over the last 2 decades is, of course, what I just referred a little while ago, that is environmental degradation and climate change. Now, this has become a particular threat to security because this is something that is man-made, but at the same time, actually, it is something over which getting a control or establishing control is relatively more difficult. Because what is happening actually is because of the continuous emission of carbon dioxide and other kinds of gases which are known as chlorofluorocarbons. These gases actually are being emitted from the earth and into the atmosphere, and as a result of it, actually what is happening is that heat is getting trapped, and therefore the earth's surface is becoming more and more warm, and consequently this is leading to what is generally known as global warming. And this global warming actually is leading to a change in the pattern of climate to which we have been used over the last so many centuries and the millennia. In fact, what is happening is that the average temperature of the globe is increasing, and there is a prediction that by the end of this century, that is the 21st century, the average temperature is likely to increase by 2 degrees centigrade. Now, on the surface, actually, it might seem that that is not a very large increase, but actually scientists know that, and they have measured that this increase is a very large increase, because as a result of it what will happen is that the polar caps, that is the Arctic Circle as well as the Antarctica, which are, as you all know, actually are essentially continents of ice. Now, this ice will be melting, and as a result of it, the sea levels will rise. And as the sea levels rise, the coastal areas of many countries are likely to be inundated. And this is the prospect that humanity faces. And there are so many countries actually which have coastlines, and so obviously there is no point in mentioning names, but you can understand the phenomenon that once the sea level rises, the coastal areas are definitely going to be inundated, and there are large numbers of people actually who live in coastal areas in different parts of the world, in the continents, in Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, South America. So these coastal areas will be inundated, and particularly vulnerable actually are the island states located in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean. I can think of particularly the Maldives, which are located very close to the Indian shores, Then, of course, you have in the Pacific, you have Nauru and Kiribati and similar other islands actually which are threatened with inundation. So the question arises that what exactly will happen to their people? Where will they go? They will have to be these are people who are generally referred to as environmental refugees. I was talking about a refugee crisis. So refugees actually can also emerge out of an environmental catastrophe, as a result of which the place where they used to live actually is no longer inhabitable, and so by force they have to shift to another place. And that means actually leaving their homes and hearths, their jobs, their livelihood. You can very well imagine actually that how a particular community, how a particular group of people can be affected as a result of this kind of environmental catastrophe. So climate change actually remains a very serious problem. Another threat to security actually is, of course, the energy crisis. This is very much linked to the environmental crisis. The energy crisis, basically what the energy crisis means is that, the world depends primarily actually on the hydrocarbons, that is coal, oil and gas, for fossil fuels, that is, as sources of energy. In fact, industry runs on that, transport runs on that, and various kinds of other economic machinery and economic institutions actually are fueled by these sources of energy. But the prospect has arisen that these hydrocarbons actually will run out by the middle of this particular century. And so what will happen after that? Because oil will run out. Coal, of course, will last for possibly another 100, 150 or 200 years. But coal is very, 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 very dangerous in the sense that, it emits carbon dioxide, which is very, very dangerous, as I have already explained, which contributes to global warming, which contributes to atmospheric pollution. And so therefore usage of coal actually is increasingly being discouraged. And actually, emphasis is now being laid on what can be described as non-conventional sources of energy, which means solar energy, wind energy, biomass, even nuclear energy. Humanity actually is faced with this prospect that on the one hand, actually the hydrocarbons will run out, and in any case, the most widely used source of source of energy, that is hydrocarbon, that is coal, actually is not environment friendly. So therefore, substitutes will have to be found for coal. And so, where does humanity go? Of course, research is taking place at a very brisk pace to develop alternative sources of energy. Unfortunately, the work actually is slow, and it will take many more years actually to find sources of energy which can replace hydrocarbons on which we are primarily dependent at the moment. Another issue that has emerged very seriously as a threat to security, of course, is the issue of human rights. Human rights, in fact, again, to define human rights, these are basically rights which a human being needs to be able to lead a decent and civilized life. That is right to life, right to liberty, right to housing, right to food, clothing, shelter, education, health, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are very basic rights, actually, and without these rights, a human being cannot lead a decent life. Now, the question may arise that this is very obvious. Why should this be a threat to security? Now, the problem is that, these definition of human rights that I have given is widely accepted across the world, but the fact of the matter is that in many countries these rights are not automatically granted to people. So in fact, torture, denial of these basic rights, and other kinds of transgressions are very common in many countries of the world, and this also is a cause of conflict within countries, and of course this also is a cause as a result of which a large number of people decide to leave the country and go to other countries for a better life. I mean, I can give examples from the 19th century when the Jews in large numbers actually left Russia and Poland because they were denied their basic human rights, and they sought refuge in the western part of Europe. Apart from that, of course, there are plenty of other examples that one can give. So the issue of human rights and denial of human rights, I mean, this is something that, of course, has been a primary concern. The United Nations has taken it up. In fact, the United Nations, immediately after the Second World War, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And other countries, other continents, Europe also adopted a Convention on Human Rights in 1950. So, there have been efforts, conscious efforts to protect and preserve human rights in different parts of the world. But the fact of the matter is that, specifically in the developing world, the issue of human rights is still a concern. And most notably, what actually is a problem is a common, an acceptance of a common definition of human rights. Because the fact of the matter is there is a division of opinion, particularly between the Asian and the developing countries on the one hand and the Western countries on the other, regarding the definition of human rights. I mean, how exactly human rights should be defined. So this is a problem, and as of now, for instance, no solution has been found to this problem. So as we can see that there has been a distinct change or shift in the pattern of threats to security in the post-Cold War era. As I have tried to establish that there are actually more threats which are of a nature not necessarily military, they are non-military, as I have already mentioned, internal strifes, civil wars, terrorism, climate change, human rights issues, energy issues, refugee crisis. So the list is a fairly long one. So we can see that this transformation has taken place from military to non-military dimensions of security. And of course, as a result, the states are now compelled to work together with one another and to work for political, economic, and social development of their inhabitants, so that these threats to security, which actually are now common to mankind and not confined to any particular state, so they have to work jointly, and collective efforts have to be made to counter these threats to security.